Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final segment of today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And like I said before, we are going to continue throughout the week with some fantasy player profiles. I know you guys have been liking these segments. I've been loving them too, just getting to learn more and more about the players who will ultimately lead you to victory in your fantasy leagues. So without further ado, let's jump into our first one of the day, our only one of the day, in terms of Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is a very intriguing player at the running back position because he's had high highs and low lows. But now he has a new home, a new look to the offense he brings to Houston. So hopefully there's a level of optimism surrounding him as he makes that move to the Houston Texans. But without further ado, let's jump right into what makes Joe Mixon so great. Joe Mixon, as a Cincinnati Bengal, really burst onto the scene early on in his career due to his explosivity, his ability to receive out of the backfield, and also his yards after contact. However, throughout his career, he's kind of had an interesting trajectory where we saw him really break out and other years kind of take the back seat a little bit. But I truly think that he still has value, especially now he's a Houston Texan. So without further ado, let's just jump right into his fantasy stats from his career and then his fantasy stats from last season. Over his career, he's accumulated 1,121 fantasy points. His best season was 3 years ago in 2021, where he had 245.9 fantasy points. In terms of last season, his last season as a Cincinnati Bengal, he was RB11, so right in the middle of the pack that you want to be looking at. So actually not as bad as people might think. He was 8th in snap share, 3rd in op share, one of his more up years, 7th in weighted opportunities, 5th in carries, 13th in targets. Very important if you are in a PPR league and looking for a very solid receiving running back. However, I don't think he did very much with that production. No matter his high volume of carries and targets and opportunities in this offense, he didn't do much with them. And that's why a lot of people are skeptical of him heading into the season. He was only 36th in yards per touch and 35th in yards created per touch, and an abysmal 45th in terms of breakaway run rate. So he has the volume. He certainly had the production in his last year as a Cincinnati Bengal, but he didn't do too much with it. And that certainly is a concern going into next season. However, like I said before, the silver lining is he's not a Cincinnati Bengal any longer, and he's now moving to a highly exciting offense in the Houston Texans that really is looking for that running back that can alleviate the pressure on C.J. Stroud as he moves into his second season in the NFL. And so, Joe Mixon, I really think, is going to maintain at the very least, his snap numbers, and he's going to get a high volume of touches, especially in early downs as well, just due to the fact that they want to open up the pass attack in later downs. That's their forte, the Houston Texans. So look for Joe Mixon, especially in early downs, perhaps out of the backfield in terms of screen game, to have a high volume of touches. It's what he does with them that's the question. In a Houston Texans offense that is steadily and rapidly improving, can Joe Mixon add the value we saw early in his career? Can he be the 2021 version of Joe Mixon? Or is he kind of wasted goods? Did the Houston Texans waste their time trying to find that running back and he's not going to be any good for them? I think the former is much more likely. I think that Joe Mixon just needed some place to feel more comfortable where he can help rather than hinder. Because on the Cincinnati Bengals, I really think that they're more focused on really evolving and paying attention to Joe Burrow's ascendancy and maintaining that level of dominance at the wide receiver position, making sure that Jamar Chase and D. Higgins are locked in for quite some time. And they're not really focused on a guy like Joe Mixon. So Joe Mixon, I feel like, needed a place where he kind of feels at home and is able to go back to being himself again. And the Houston Texans offers him that perfect fit. Now, in terms of what they're projecting him to have, it's certainly not as promising as you would like Joe Mixon's numbers to be, but it certainly tells the tale of what he can be in this offense. 940 rush yards for him, they're projecting 8 TDs, 329 receiving yards and 2 TDs for a total of 194.5 fantasy points projected. And so I certainly feel like that tells the tale of balance and versatility that they believe Joe Mixon has. And I really like that for the Houston Texans because balance and versatility is the name of the game here. CJ Stroud, a lot of people would love for him to continue throwing the football deep. A lot of people would love for him to add some scrambling ability to his game. But when all is said and done, especially in your second season in the NFL where you want to maintain your success you had as a rookie, especially if you had success as a rookie, because you don't want your production to wane, you definitely need something to counterbalance everything, to balance everything out. And Joe Mixon certainly can provide that. I'm not saying he will, but based on these numbers, he certainly adds some modicum of balance that the Houston Texans are going to want. Now, the caveat is Bobby Slovic, the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. He, last year, certainly used CJ Stroud to a very positive effect. He got him going mainly by relying on him to elevate his receivers around him. Because of this, CJ Stroud's numbers became very inflated. He perhaps overperformed for what was expected of him. And I think that Bobby Slovic is certainly going to want to utilize the best traits that CJ Stroud can take away from the season. Because in order to sustain that level of success for Stroud, make sure he doesn't decline in progression, he's going to want to really hyper-focus on CJ Stroud getting the ball out early and often. I think the Houston Texans offense is actually going to get a lot quicker than people think. I think that CJ Stroud is going to get the ball out much quicker. I think there's going to be shorter passes implemented into the scheme. And I truly think that CJ Stroud's areas of improvement will stem from the short to intermediate areas of the field. How this will affect Joe Mixon is the question I'm asking here. Because if Joe Mixon is brought in to be a pure rusher, to simply counteract what CJ Stroud brings with his arm strength and accuracy at the QB position, how will Joe Mixon complement CJ Stroud if what I'm saying is true? If the Houston Texans' tempo on offense does quicken. And so, if I'm a fantasy manager and I'm in, say, a dynasty league, I think that I would ultimately pick Joe Mixon as a flex option. However, if, say, I'm in a PPR league, I would certainly consider Joe Mixon being a starting running back. Here's why. Because of the fact that, CJ Stroud can always rely on his receivers, I definitely think that opens the door for more screen games and thus a way for CJ Stroud to quicken the pace and tempo of this offense. A lot of what I'm hearing surrounding the Texans really debate is the fact that they want to get going on early downs. They now see what CJ Stroud can be, and they want to get going on early downs. So that definitely opens up the platform for the screen game to get going, and thus that is why I will leave Joe Mixon, at the very least in PPR leagues, can get going for you as a fantasy manager. So you really have to weigh your options here. Is Joe Mixon going to be a pure rusher, or is he going to be someone who adds that value out of the backfield? And that's the question you're going to have to answer. But that should just about do it for today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you guys liked this. Like, follow, and subscribe to the shows and the networks on this podcast network. It's truly incredible what these other guys are doing as well. So don't just support me as much as I like it. But that should just about wrap it up. I've been Chris Shepard, and this has been another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition, back and better than ever. Thank you guys so much for watching.